the 28th of August 2022. Hope everybody's doing good on this Sunday. Day 1 of week 1000. Actually, a lot more than that. Seems like I've been at this since I was a baby. Okay, so Fukushima 2011. I got some headlines I haven't covered from 2011. So that's always fun. I think nuclear scientists, if kids want to be nuclear scientists, or anybody that becomes a nuclear scientist, when they graduate, they should have both of their hands chopped off. And so they can know what it feels like to be Marie Curie. And also, it's less likely they'll kill us all. You know, the old prophet, man with no hands makes no drumming noises. Okay, that's not a prophet. Dana. Fukushima's like eating a banana, walking in the sunshine, flying on an airplane. So, I think journalists, if somebody becomes a journalist, the minute they become a journalist, they should have both of their hands cut off so they can't write lies like this for the rest of their lives. I'm saying voluntarily, right? They should voluntarily. Okay, so we got a poll tonight. By the way, this is Japan. All the markers you see are prefectures that were banned by 55 countries for over a decade. Canada wasn't one of them, of course. Canada lifted all restrictions after 93 days. It said, murder them all. Because Japan couldn't ship the food to any other country, so they shipped it to Canada after the first 93 days. It was open season on Canadians. And now everybody in Canada is sick. That's what evil looks like, growing food in a nuclear wasteland. So we big poll tonight. Give me a second here, because you know how it is around this land. I gotta get my external plugged in. Always something in this world. How could that not happen? What the hell, over? No external tonight? He's number 4. Number 4 get moved. And number 4 is too. Look at this guy here. Dope. Alright, we're back up in business here. Bring us a poll, Dana. Stop with the nonsense. Yeah, my HDMI cable was playing hide and go seek with the TriCaster. I think we got it now. Would you eat radioactive farm food grown around a nuclear wasteland or nuclear power plants? Somebody said yes. Fake. That's fake. There's 2 of me. Or am I going blind here? So is it just a coincidence that almost all nuclear power plants worldwide are surrounded by farms? Is that an accident? Just a pure coincidence, Dana? Or because the fuel pools at these sites are hemorrhaging radiation all the time, is this a good way to keep the radiation bioaccumulation down? Because the food gets shipped out to all the supermarkets. And that way the nuclear industry doesn't get a black eye. and you get leukemia and Alzheimer's and dementia and autism, diabetes and Down syndrome and heart problems and liver problems and respiratory problems and pituitary, thyroid glands. You get Alzheimer's from eating this food and dementia and autism. There's 1,800 illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries, illnesses. So it's probably just an accident that all these nuclear power plants are built in prime farmland, Dana. Totally accident. It's probably an accident that they don't know, because they've done hundreds of thousands of studies on how food uptakes radiation, how grapevines suck up radiation, strawberries suck up radiation, how plants and trees and bushes and tomato plants and potatoes and fruit trees and fruit plants and wheat all suck up radiation. There's no way the scientists could know that when they built all those nuclear power plants in the farmland, Dana. So stop picking on nuclear, you big bully. Why is it when you zoom out at every nuclear power plant that I looked at, it's surrounded by farms? That's got to be the biggest coincidence in human history. How is that even possible that all the nuclear power plants are surrounded? Not coal plants, not gas plants, not oil plants, but nuclear power plants. And the problem with it, of course, is that there's irreversible heart damage for children with 50 becquerels a kilogram of just cesium. 50 becquerels a kilogram for any adults is permanent lesions to your organs. Even future nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms. And here in Japan, they're actually harvesting food in a nuclear wasteland right alongside the 1-ton bags of radiation. They totally love you, though. They totally adore you. They're just trying to help you turn into Spider-Man and Hulks and Superman. Yeah, 100% accident. Fukushima radiation will poison food from decades on top of that. It's not bad enough that your farms are your worst nightmare. Your supermarkets are the scariest places you can go. But this model is based on 16 days of radioactive fallout from Japan. So when it stops in a few moments, that's at 16 days. Well, excuse me. Where did that come from? My goodness. Look at it. So nuclear industry is like, woo, they got some serious hate on for you. I don't think barrels of nuclear waste should have smiling faces on it. I'm just a little old-fashioned maybe, but that's a nuclear scientist kissing her husband as she heads off to work in the morning. So this is March the 15th, 4 days after Fukushima started detonating, with nuclear power plants detonating. That's words you're not supposed to be uttering. Will General Electric get whacked? Unfortunately, they didn't, for the catastrophic failures of its nuke plants in Fukushima. You mean TEPCO, right? General Electric skated it away with barely whisper. This is one of the few times And this happens to be 4 days after the plant started blowing up. Again, that's not a sentence you should be saying. These plants feature huge pools of water up in the highest levels of the buildings above the reactors, which hold the spent fuel rods from the reactors for 4 decades. Try wrapping your mind around that. Robert Alvarez, who we've called out I don't know how many times over the years, a former nuclear energy advisor to President I never had sex with that woman Bill Clinton, has written, were the fuel pools to be damaged in an explosion and lose their cooling and radiation shielding water, they could burst into flames from the resulting burning of the highly flammable zirconium cladding of the fuel rods. Zirconium, when it's exposed to oxygen, literally detonates around 1600 degree temperatures. And then that ignites the plutonium and the uranium that's inside, blasting perhaps 3 to 9 times as much of these materials into the air as was released by the Chernobyl disaster. And that's if just one reactor blows up. So he's saying up to 9 times as much radiation goes into the environment in Chernobyl with a single reactor. We've actually got numbers saying 100, which was the Ruskies. Each pool, Robert Alvarez says, generally contains 5 to 10 times as much nuclear material as the reactors themselves. So the reactors are supposed to have 720 tons. 800 assemblies. Each assembly is around 1,800 pounds. The fuel rods are 18 pounds each, and there's around 100 fuel rods per assembly. Each assembly, well, the fuel rods are 12 feet long, 18 pounds each. There's around 100 of them in an assembly, and there's 800 assemblies in those particular reactors, which means that's 720 tons. And if you do the extreme of 10 times more in each fuel pool, folks, each one of them, there's 2 of them, is 7,200 tons. 7,200 tons. That's actually important for later. At 2,000 pounds a ton, that's 14 million pounds. There's 2 fuel. Now, the reason they have these huge fuel pools is because they don't have a repository anywhere in Japan or anywhere else on the planet for the fuel rods. So 14,400 pounds. So let me go back to 7,200 tons. Chernobyl was 200 tons. It was, by the way, it was mostly graphite. These reactors are, in the pools, will have around 7,000 tons of pure uranium and plutonium. Actually, around 18,000 was lowballing it, obviously, but 18,000 pounds per fuel pool is plutonium. And that was lost, obviously. And so when you do the numbers, they could hold theoretically almost 30 million pounds in these buildings. And so the fuel pools at the very, you see those 2 depictions at the top of that building, they're 190 feet tall, 150 feet wide. They're enormous buildings, right? 19-story buildings. That's the guts of Reactor 3. The reactor core and the fuel pools are unequivocally gone. This was a mixed oxide fuel. That's the remains of it after they ran out of homeless and the destitute victims of society. This is the official cover story where they're pretending they're at the top of a building that don't even exist, getting fuel out of a pool in 2020. So with each pool containing 5 to 10 times as much nuclear material as a reactor can hold, it's a stunning amount of emissions into the environment. No single weapon competes with the potential damage from Fukushima Unit 4. So former Japan ambassador is only talking about a single building. And number 4, nuclear reactor potential super bomb. So they're not talking about the fuel pools, he's talking about the reactors, because they're 720 tons. But that's actually to the left, the remains of reactor 4. And to the right is your loving media trying to convince you that everything is normal. Don't listen to Dana fearmonger. Yale professor had said, nothing like this has ever been attempted. All of humanity will be threatened for thousands of years if the rods in the Unit 4 fuel pool touch and have a chain reaction. And so to your right, each of these fuel pools, what they're talking about, they don't exist. So humanity, and you can't threaten humanity without threatening the 8 million species. Okay, so that's a significant revelation for people who are not too familiar with this topic, which is most of the planet. Not the diehards, not the hardcores. If you're here more than 5 days in a row, you are one hell of a hardcore information junkie. It gets worse, according to the news report. Great. Reactor 3 unit I showed you earlier was using moxed fuel rods. This is where they use reclaimed uranium plutonium. It's so volatile. It's like 2 billion times. So the emissions from a meltdown are considered to be 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. Then the emissions from a mixed oxide fuel is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. So another way to look at it is super hot particles. With 2 million atoms at the head of a needle, but you can't see it. But if you get one of these hot particles, and anything from a nuclear meltdown is considered a hot particle, actually ingested in your body, this is extreme bad news for your body. There's no way you won't eventually get sick. Just a single atom could take decades before the diseases and illnesses manifest. You have to ask, what kind of numbskull would put a waste pond for spent reactor cores right above the reactor of a nuclear power plant, thus ensuring that in the event of a meltdown, not only would the core of the reactor blow up into the environment, but also all of the spent fuel from prior years. And pin the tail on the fuel pool. I don't know. I heard about these waste pools in the past and I always assumed they were somewhere else on the plant's grounds, away from the reactors. Turns out they put the damn thing right in line of fire of any meltdown, which is something we talk about, the ludicrousness. At this point, only 2 of the buildings housing the 6 troubled reactors had blown up. This was on the 15th, right, of March. This is day 4 after this, counting the tsunami that day. TEPCO has only lost control of the cooling systems 3 of the 6. Well, actually, they lost complete control of the site. Once the first one blew up, it threw fuel rods all over the site. All you can do is run away. There was no such thing as a Fukushima 50. That was created as a deception, same as the fuel tanks. The tankster is a deception, right? To make you complacent and thinking that they have it under control. You can't have control at a nuclear meltdown. Only 3 have suffered partial meltdowns. Again, I showed you the pictures. Things can get a lot worse if one or more goes into a full meltdown, which they had, of course. Or if one or more of those waste ponds, which is, they're not ponds, just they call them that to make them seem harmless, right? Blows up, which of course, as I showed you, did. General Electric may end up having to change its motto to General Electric brings death to things. Stunning. To work at Fukushima, you have to be ready to die. Die. We read there, now the date on that was April the 17th. This is 36 days later. It's at this stage, it's as bad as you get. So they're not talking about nuclear scientists or nuclear students. It's a nuclear scientist, nuclear academics have never actually physically went to the site. We read they're sleeping on hard soil. The homeless, of course, not nuclear scientists. That they have only 2 meals per day. Mom, nuclear scientists are only getting 2 meals per day at the meltdown. No, son, that's the homeless and destitute and victims of society and immigrants don't speak the language. They're the actual heroes, son, not nuclear scientists. And are rationed in drinking water. Working on the world's most dangerous job, and they're going to ration you on drinking water. Up until 10 days ago, we saw no people except the helicopter pilots who dropped the seawater. First off, the pilots, it was too much radiation for helicopter pilots. Does anybody really think that if there's so much radiation, the helicopter pilots can't go in and drop water, that people are actually physically working? Because people do believe that, right? And so people because it's hard to learn this stuff, unfortunately. You know, this is a death cult, and over 600 helicopter pilots at Chernobyl died in the first 2 weeks. All of them, every one of them. A lot of those helicopters only made one mission. They were so radioactive they could never fly them again. They couldn't drop seawater on the fuel pools. The sulfur would be the worst thing can happen, but they did manage to spray it in there after. We had to wait until Friday, March the 25th, to see the first photos of workers in what they call full protective suits, were paper suits. These being worn inside the plant where you could see the general state of disrepair, even in the computer and control rooms. They couldn't go back to the control room for 7 years. And then it was just fleetingly went in, snuck some pictures and got edited. They had to get edited right away. You'll never go in those control rooms again. That day, 3 subcontractors were taken to the hospital because they were seriously radiated. Subcontractors. I'll introduce you to them shortly. That was the first time we heard officially about subcontractors. But then there are different types of subcontractors. At the very bottom of the pyramid, for example, temporary workers who use mops to clean the reactors. This is a fake story that came... Originally, that's what they told people about 3 Mile Island. The very last thing, and also Chalk River in Canada in 1955, but the very last thing, like if you're going to go into a nuclear meltdown with a mop, you're not coming back out. They're trying to figure out where the lethal zone is. So yeah, take that mop and go over there. Count to 10. And so this was 36 days later. Today, how many employees are there on the site? Now, in the playlist, my playlists, I have a set, I think it's 6 videos, where we show you pictures from all of this time frame that was released by TEPCO. And it's a very painstaking amount of work I went to explain the deception with the actual documentation from TEPCO. According to the most recent information, would be 600, and figure might include firefighters and soldiers, but it remains unclear. There's nothing you can do with a nuclear meltdown. Now, the pictures we've seen, we've never, in any of the pictures, the most we've ever seen, I think, was 12 people, and that was a barge that came in and was unloading small generators and other equipment, and then they left again, of course, right? Wearing paper suits at a nuclear meltdown. Don't put that on your bucket list, by the way. TEPCO had to mobilize its network of subcontractors for emergency recruiting in the region. Emergency recruiting. Why didn't you go to all the nuclear power plants and ask for volunteers? Because you get beat up, Dana. They got unions. According to the ads that circulate, and it's legal to beat up someone trying to make you go into a nuclear meltdown, by the way, if that ever happens to you in the future, it's perfectly legal to pick up a baseball bat and stop it, and which are relayed on Twitter. So they were putting ads on Twitter. They were offering 10,000 yen, which is like $100 a day or something. An hour, I think, was for 3 hours. Is that what this story was? But double the average salary for young temporary workers. Double the average salary. Oh, sure, yeah. 80 average temporary workers getting $42 an hour. Short here. But does not represent an exceptional offer. Despite the sacrifice of those who agree to go there, TEPCO continues to skimp on the wages. A man 48 years old testified he lived 40 kilometers and had been called by someone saying, "We're looking for suckers over 50 who could intervene in the reactors, and the pay is higher than usual." Looking for people over 50. That's where you're supposed to say, "I want to talk to an adult." You won't come. The wording over 50 suggests that in order to come work on a site, you must be ready to die. They're not suggesting it. That's a fact. That's what they're saying, right? Elsewhere, I read that there was locals who are willing to do the maximum, but they do not want to see everything lost for 30 or for 1,000 years to come. So there was patriots that were willing to sacrifice their lives, because that makes the industry feel better. Oh no, they wanted to die, Dana. Was any of them nuclear scientists, nuclear academics? Come on, Dana, be serious. The Machini newspaper published an interview. I probably butchered the Japanese name because I'm sucks with speaking Japanese. Published an interview with an employee of Shitco who described the extreme difficulty of the conditions for intervention and the patched together systems they are compelled to use to protect themselves, like wrapping themselves in plastic bags. You know, reactors are around for 70 years and they don't even have a suit for people to wear at the nuclear meltdowns for a lack of appropriate protective suits. Nothing says stupid quite like nuclear, does it? Let's see if I can find that one. Oh, I think if human sacrifices ever start being trendy again, nuclear scientists should be volunteered for the first couple of 100,000. Or until you run out of them, whatever comes first. Where are we to here? Nuclear industry is just... calling it a nuclear industry is Probably criminal, but where the hell is that stuff? What did I do? Don't know what I got done with it. Oh well. Just hang on, looking for something in particular. Something that'll make you laugh, hopefully. Let me see. I know this is hopeless for me to look for it, but that's my norm, right? If it's not extremely difficult, I'm not interested. Oh, well, I guess I'm not interested. It sucks, too, because it's pretty funny stuff. But my go-to list were... Anyway. I'll never find it. Keep going, Dana. Wrapping themselves in plastic bags. That sounds like nuclear scientists to me. How about you? Only the bosses are furnished with dosimeters, according to another worker present on that day. TEPCO confirmed that due to the tsunami, a large number of dosimeters were damaged. Apparently, pre-Fukushima meltdowns, they had 5,000 dosimeters. But after the tsunami, there was only 320 left. You know, the one that ran through the site. Toshiba sent them 50. Way to go, Toshiba. In this part of the reactor, you have to move quickly to receive the smallest dose possible. First off, you're not going in these reactors. And you can't move quickly with lead-soled shoes, because they were talking about where they were just wearing crappy rubber boots, because you can't move fast with the heavy lead-lined boots. International Commission on Radiological Protection, the ICRPAK Scumbag Seniors, recommends that an annual dose for nuclear slaves not exceed 20 millisieverts, 20,000 microsieverts. You're at a nuclear meltdown where it's airborne radiation, so microsieverts is how you measure like gamma shines and X-rays and neutrons, right? But you have to also measure the dust. We call them dust particles, right? And you're talking about, 500,000 parts per million of radiation particles. Even in normal times, workers receive large doses. They're at a nuclear meltdown, so you can't measure in millisieverts. You got to measure in sieverts. And 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. And they were getting lethal doses for sure. Dose rates now are 100 millisieverts. So MSV is millisieverts and USV is microsieverts. I just hated how they changed, right? To Rankins, the rims, the microsieverts, etc., etc. They changed those on purpose to make it difficult for you to understand what was happening at each of these events near the reactors. So the claim that they were only getting a sievert per hour is ludicrous. A liter of water was 2 sieverts per liter of just beta, by the way. Dying for TEPCO. Fukushima nuclear contract workers dying for TEPCO. April 29th, 2011. Liquidators recruited by ads. Job offers come not from TEPCO, but from companies whose business is construction and cleaning maintenance, not nuclear experts. The description indicates only that the work is at a nuclear plant. The job is specific at 3 hours per day at an hourly wage of 10,000 yen. which is 94 Canadian. And there's no information about the danger, only the suggestion to ask the employer for further details on food, lodging, transportation, and insurance. And then you end up, I think they were making $11 an hour. Is what they were actually, right? We've covered this a lot over the last decade. The life of contract workers at the nuke plant. Those who answer these offers may have little awareness of the dangers, and they're likely to have few other job opportunities. And so $122 an hour is hardly a king's ransom, given the risk of cancer from high radiation levels. It's not just cancer, there's 1,800 illnesses. They love just painting you into a corner and saying cancer, but it's just not. Once your immune system is compromised, you're way more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless and innocuous and benign. Those who fall ill will not even appear in the statistics. No, and they're fired as soon as they fall ill, and they're told to pick up their check in 2 weeks. And they don't live 2 weeks. They live 2 hours, 2 days, but not 2 weeks. Those who fall ill will not even appear in the statistics. What is clear is that the contract laborers are routinely exposed to the highest level of radiation. In April the 23rd, the government urged children back to school at Fukushima Prefecture. 42 days after, stating that the risk of 20 millisieverts, which is 20,000 microsieverts, or more per year was acceptable, despite the high vulnerability, because children are extremely more vulnerable, just absurdly more vulnerable, and particularly the females. In 2009, Japan's nuclear industry recruited more than 80,000 contract workers, and they had 10,000 regular employees. So they get the what so-called contract workers are typically day workers who take any job for a day for minimum wage, and they'll get sent into the danger zone, right? All nuclear plants will do that, by the way. Whether in France or Japan, the nuclear industry nurtures a heavy culture of secrecy concerning the number of radiated workers. It's despicable, really, what this industry is actually like. Of the 830,000 liquidators mobilized at Chernobyl, the report estimated at least 112,000 died already, compared to some 50 in the UN report. UN is not your friend at all. They're nobody's friend, including themselves. They were created after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was 195 militaries. And they don't have a right to exist, but they've taken over pretty well much of the planet already. Everybody follows this so-called UN, which is, according to George Bush Sr., he called them the New World Order. And appropriately so. So, when they say, so let's look at what's really going on at this site. Who are they, right? It's not nuclear scientists or academics or journalists or professors or nuclear students or nuclear companies or nuclear corporations. Ever. Not a single time. TEPCO confirms steam coming up from underground in Reactor 1 was 4.7 sieverts an hour. So 3 sieverts is considered a lethal dose. You're going to die within 2 weeks. That's just an exposure over a short period of time. If you're on these sites, you're getting... Because your organs will start melting, and if you leave, you might live for a week or two, but before it finally kills you. Massive radioactivity release at Fukushima going on for almost 3 years. Massive radioactivity releases going on for almost 3 years. The visible steam is just a tip. It's not visible steam. It's a radioactive plume that looks like steam, right? Just the tip of the iceberg. The containment vessels are broken. Well, I showed you the pictures earlier. They're annihilated. Workers say the ground under Fukushima plant is cracking, that the radioactive steam is coming up. This is another report. In 2011, now the model you're seeing is about 60 times normal speed. You're talking about hundreds and thousands of sieverts in that plume. In 6 places, the Geiger counters registered 10 sieverts, but the Geiger counter's maximum was 10 sieverts. These were stationary Geiger counters. This is a lethal plume. The whole site is a lethal plume. They've abandoned these sites many times for extended periods and hushed it up. For the average population, they had no concept. It's time to make a geyser. Think about that, the context of that word geyser. Because they have such contempt for the people that sacrificed everything to make the country what it is. Like the retirees in Japan are considered a burden. And like they're actually hated by the population there. It's time to make a geyser suicide squad, but nobody hates people more than the nuclear industry. TEPCO admits it'll run out of nuclear scientists in 5 years. I'm sorry. TEPCO admits it's going to run out of the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society. The immigrants who don't speak the language. Tokyo Vice Governor suggests as the Fukushima draft, all of Japan must face it. Sale of foreign Geiger counters is banned. Suggesting a draft, not for nuclear scientists. They closed down 56 nuclear power plants. None of them volunteered to go to Fukushima. 50,000 people. Nobody volunteered. Officials 311 notebook concerned half of Japan to be covered in nuclear waste. 60 and older should be prepared to die at the Fukushima plant. 60 and older should be prepared to die if your power plant breaks down. Expert senior writer, all of eastern Japan evacuated if Fukushima plant was abandoned. All of eastern Japan should be evacuated. In 100 years, it should still be evacuated. Send us people who don't mind dying.
Another example, immediately after the first hydrogen explosion, TEPCO gave out an order a request to all of these labor dispatching companies, and they said, send us people who don't mind dying. At that time, it was really very much a panic situation, perhaps, but normally when you enter any area where there might be possible radiation exposure.
Look, you go all the way back to the Sellafield, Windscale meltdown. They changed the name after the Sellafield to hide what they done. Here's one of the things they done. The police went out on buses. Back in those days, the people who sat in the back row of the theaters were the poorest people, right? Rich people sat up front. Because back in those days, TVs were like 6 inches by 6 inches or something, right? And so everybody went to the theaters. The theaters were like TVs back in those days. People were taken from the movie theaters by the police and forced to go into the reactors and dealing with the burning fuel rods. They done the same thing for Chernobyl, by the way, too, right? And who knows where else, of course. So they didn't go to the local power plants and ask for volunteers. They didn't go to all the nuclear institutions and colleges and universities and ask for the experienced people to come volunteer. They didn't ask for the army to come there and volunteer. They went to the theaters and kidnapped people who knew nothing about nuclear. and volunteered them. That's not a betrayal per se, as much as it's just that's serial killers, mass murderers. It's ludicrous, but that's actually what they done. I took a documentary. I was talking about it, and I put all the graphics there to try to articulate it, because it's just surreal, right?
The police from the factory.
Let me start that again. I forgot how low his volume was.
The police from the factory had turned up looking for volunteers, and they'd brought a bus, and they decided the best way to get the volunteers was to go to the cinema and volunteer the back 2 rows at the show to go into the factory to, as it turned out, to help push the fuel rods out of the reactor.
To help push the fuel rods out of the reactors. Forbes, who's outrageous, by the way, and hates, is as pro-nuclear as they get. Homeless people are being sold to companies and put to work on Fukushima. So how come nuclear scientists won't go and do it? How come nuclear scientists didn't speak out for those homeless people? UN officials astounded homeless are taken to work in Fukushima ready to die. At the end of the month, they're left with no money. And they end up in debt to the employers after food. How come we're not protecting these victims? The mentally handicapped are working at Fukushima and given second-hand paper suits. Help Wanted ads seeks employees that can carry out a conversation. Is that why there's no nuclear scientists there, I wonder? Some people are not being given food, have no places to go. We can only work momentarily. They always need workers. Fukushima co-workers are really tempered. They use violence. We're not to cause any trouble like fight while at Reactor 3, which is Medusa, right? Fukushima worker wanted to escape from the nuclear plant but feared he might hurt me. Top Tokyo doctor dealing with the nuclear workers demand the government step in, because some of them can't even read. Mentally disabled are working at Fukushima. The homeless are treated like disposable people. Workers are tricked into being on the front lines at Fukushima. You can't escape. They kept me in a shed. There's nowhere else to go. Everyone is stuck. After a few days, they throw you away. That's believable, because that's how we know that is the nuclear industry. That's how everybody seems in the root is just ruthless. They don't see people as humans, right? They're just nails that go into a piece of wood. Fukushima worker films at the plant that was asked to fake documents. Underage people, or children, are working at nuclear meltdowns. Guardian on Fukushima workers, we felt like kamikaze pilots. Acute radiation sickness. Fukushima decontamination workers, we were punished if we tried to resist. Seniors are sought for frontline radiation cleanup in Japan. Seniors. And that makes me so angry. It makes me incredibly angry every time I see that. It never not made me angry when I read that headline. Fukushima resident seeks answers. This is April 21st, 2011. Amid mixed signals from batshit media, kooky TEPCO scumbags, and degenerate government. There was 150,000 sites like this at one point. 150,000. 150,000 nuclear waste sites, which is only 3% of the prefecture that they were cleaning up, was where farmland, not cleaning up, but pretending they're cleaning up. The bags were only meant to last a couple of years, so they would have fell apart shortly after. The mistrust of the media surged among the people of Fukushima. In part, this is due to reports filed by mainstream journalists who are unwilling to visit the area near the crippled. Like, these words, unfortunately, are triggers for me. I hate the word crippled. You don't call Chernobyl crippled. So if you lived in this community and you had to abandon it because of something you can't see or smell or taste or hear or feel or touch or pick up or throw rocks at, and you can't come back, you left your pets there and they died of starvation, you can't go back and visit your loved ones in the graveyards, you can't go back and collect your pictures or your precious stuff you worked for all your life on your properties. You got to abandon your community. And how can somebody call something like this carbon-free? How does that actually work? What kind of sickness of the mind would say that has redeeming qualities? But above all, it is the result of contradictory reports released by the media, Scumco, and degenerate government. In a nuclear wasteland, Iwaki City, which was abandoned for 7 years straight, they didn't move until about 3 months later, I think it was, had repeatedly confirmed radiations at a stable level which is not harmful to human health. And this is a lunatic assertion, obviously. That's Iwaki City, folks. Following the principal's speech of the school doctor in his white coat stated matter-of-factly that based on science, people should know that the worst of the earthquake damage had passed and that radiation leakage, I showed you the pictures earlier, from the Fukushima Daiichi plant were decreasing and would soon fade away. It won't fade away for a couple of 100,000 years, a couple of million years, a couple of billion years. It faded away, some of it did, all over the planet. That's a 20-day fallout model. Fade away, Dana. Troubled by the fact that the milk business he managed suffered a 90% drop in sales, which is frightening. They should be 100%, right? The fact that he's selling it, the government's like, here's another sucker selling radioactive food for us. As a result of radiation fears. Radiation fears. Did that look like it was unfounded fears to anybody? Anybody? Some farmers were forced to throw away their milk. And at least one farmer is rumored to have committed suicide over TEPCO. TEPCO, the nuclear industry is just horrifically evil. It's hard to appreciate how actually evil this industry is. It's the biggest threat to all species on the planet. And it's a permanent threat for millions of years now. But even after the level 7 announcement, there had been no panic in the city. No panic in the city. They were all too numb from radiation poisoning, I guess. A more intense form of the same crisis struck Minamasoma City, closer to the nuclear plant within the 20-kilometer zone on its north side. It doesn't matter what side. The plume covered the whole bloody planet. For more than a week, the city was like an island bereft empty of food, water, and gasoline. And in desperation on March the 24th, the mayor sent an SOS to the world through a YouTube, begging for support to his dying community. Yeah, he wouldn't let people evacuate, basically. 20,000 remained, 50,000 evacuated. We have to think of the means to save the remaining weak people and some who do not have the money to evacuate, which is true. The Director of Public Relations for Milwaukee City Disaster Management Headquarters explains, since harmful rumors are so powerful, not only are farming and fishing industries affected, even some industries have been damaged as a result of claims that even machines are contaminated. It's hard to imagine that people could be that ignorant or that evil. I mean, he has to drive by, not then, but in the future, he was driving by thousands of these sites of waste, and he probably felt the same way. It was harmless. I talked to the mayor of Lydiate village in the 30-kilometer zone who told me there is no information and I do not know what to do. That wasn't an accident. Go there and mark on all those bags. Dana is wrong. Obsolete Optics wants to know where the Geiger counter is to. I forgot to charge the battery. I forgot to take it out. Oops. On Thursday. I didn't. You got to realize how burnt out I was come Thursday of last week. Because time we done Monday, Tuesday, or Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. These were all tough shows the last couple of months. In the last couple of weeks, I've been really into my groove. It's a lot of work, right? And somehow or another, I always pride myself on details, right? It's hard to wrap your mind around what the whole process to firing up the studio, all the equipment, all the lights, and there's a whole lot of checks I have to make before each show on top of everything else to make sure all the systems are actually going to work. All the systems I got are plugged into each other. They talk to each other. It's absurd. And I shouldn't, I've been doing this for so many years. I find it hard to imagine that I could forget, because the camera battery is such an important facet, right? I've been doing it for so long. I actually forgot. I have a routine, right? And so I don't accidentally forget things, right? But occasionally I forget. And we figured out what was wrong with the truck. It wasn't the rear bearings, like I thought. It's the U-joint. They're pretty cheap. I'll get them tomorrow and probably get them installed tomorrow. They're like $50 each or something. And I might do it myself. I'm a little bit iffy on it because I'm actually not very healthy, but I can probably get it installed for $100. That'll be a $200 bill tomorrow. But now, when I'm talking about it, the idler control valve is delayed until Friday, according to Amazon. Even though Monday was the guaranteed delivery date, right? Because I got Prime, and I have a guaranteed delivery date, and they gave me no updates on shipping. It just changed the date of delivery to Friday, where normally it says like September the 2nd. But yesterday, or Friday, when I checked it, it said Friday, and I was thinking it was going to be that Friday, but it was supposed to be on tomorrow. It was supposed to show up. I'm pissed about that, by the way. And Ed left a comment in one of my last videos saying that it was the U-joint. And so what I done to check, see if it would make a difference, is I sprayed the back U-joint with lithium grease this morning, and then I took it for a drive, and the sound disappeared for about an hour, about a half an hour. And when I came home, it slowly crept back a bit, which meant that's exactly what it was that U-joint, see? I need to change both of them, because the U-joints are, there's two of them, they're like a X. And at the head of each X is a cap, so to speak, that's full of bearings on the inside. And I haven't greased them in years. So they fell apart, right? And they're not that expensive, right? If I order it on Amazon, I can get them for like $30 each, but it takes 2 weeks or something to show up. So it's better just to go pick it up and raise the money later. Surprisingly, and I'm getting it fixed tomorrow. Or even if I got to do it myself, I'll do it. I'm not happy about it, but I'll do it. Because we want to get everything ready so we can launch the boat when we get the idler control valve. We got a mass die-off of species happening down here. And Shayla sent me a text message, says she wanted to go on an expedition with me. It's unfortunately so complicated. First off, I got to raise a chunk of money, right? Last year it was no problem because I had 24,000 subscribers. And so it was no problem to do this stuff. But, you know, when we were out researching spiders last year, 400 kilometers away from home in the woods in the middle of nowhere, YouTube closed my site with no warning and left me stranded. And thanks to a donor, I was able to make it home. And, you know, you got to realize how much wear and tear, by the way, goes on my truck each year. Like, really, you got to wrap your mind around how much abuse that truck goes through. And we got away for years and years and years with no issue. And now there's little issues cropping up. It's maintenance that I should have known better, but I'm worn out. And I always felt that, you know, 30 or 40 people would figure this out watching my stuff, and they would start, you know, bloggers, and they would blog about this and start becoming articulated on it. And it never happened, right? So the industry doesn't have any blowback going on. And because they're so evil, all they got to do is, what is the British calling it? Kettle you in? Since March 11th, the government has excluded all internet medias, all foreign medias from the official press conferences on the emergency situation. Now, we covered some of these videos. I got over 100 of these emergency situations. There's a situation at the Fukushima Daiichi plant was the name of the series. There's over 100 of these press conferences. And there was foreign media, but it's the pro-nuclear foreign media that we were seeing. And they weren't asking real questions. They were pumped. Their job was to keep the lie alive, right? How's our poll doing tonight? Let's get back to that. Would you eat the radioactive farm food grown around a nuclear power plant or a nuclear waste site? 92% of 50 votes had said absolutely no, which is the right answer, folks. You don't want to eat radioactive food. Why would you do that? It's not a crime, by the way, for them to poison you. It is a crime for you to poison them, though. Registered representatives of freelance internet media are limited to a single press conference per week. They had press conference 7 days a week, every day, at the Prime Minister's office, right? Good ear mark on all those bags. Fukushima was harmless. if you're an academic. There is one particular telling example of media shielding TEPCO. I can show you hundreds, by the way. By suppressing information. This concerns plutonium, because like your Geiger counters can't check for plutonium. After the reactor blew up on March the 14th, which was reactor 4, there were concerns about the leakage of plutonium. Each fuel pool has around 18,000 pounds of plutonium. 2% of the fuel is plutonium. However, astonishingly, until 2 weeks later, not a single media representative had raised the question of plutonium. Well, there was, and they were accused immediately of fear-mongering, right? That was Lake Barrett. Remember that? Let me see if I can find it. It's always fun to see Scumbag Lake Barrett. Where would that be to? Bloomberg? Was that Bloomberg? Let me see if it shows up. Yeah. Fuel pool. I got some cut out, and that's not what I'm looking for. Barrett. I got it. I got everything alphabetically, right? So this was Lake Barrett. Let me see. I think this is the one where Buddy asks him about plutonium. He says, that's just fear-mongering.
For the first time, potentially fatal levels of radiation have been discovered outside the crippled nuclear plant, raising concerns that contamination is working its way further into Japan's water and food supplies and foreshadowing a long and expensive cleanup. Nuclear engineer Lake Barrett knows what it takes to mop up a catastrophic mess like this. Lake led the initial response to the 3 Mile Island accident here in the United States. He's with us this morning from Washington. Lake, just how alarming are these latest developments in your mind?
Well, it's to be expected in a situation like they have over there in Japan at the moment. They have a lot of damage to the cores. They have a lot of radioactive water and contamination inside the plant. So it is very, very challenging for them.
Can this disaster be contained? When you have water with these levels of radiation getting outside the plant, what does that mean?
Demon.
Well, you can never 100% contain anything in life. So the majority of the radioactivity is in the cores, it is in the plant, but they have probably several million gallons of highly radioactive water in the plant, on floors in the buildings. And there is ventilation. There's not much ventilation filters in the building. So some of that slowly seeps out into the air, and they're doing their best to contain it right now.
Lake, help us explain just what the different kinds of radiation mean to the ecosystem and to the environment. Some of the radiation will dissipate pretty quickly, right? Where are the major concerns?
Well, the iodine-131 that you hear about, that has an 8-day half-life, so that decays away fairly quickly. So that's just a short-term impact. The larger concern would be radioactive cesium-137 and strontium-90, which has longer half-lives. But that is mostly in the water. It is locally in the plant. With very sensitive instruments, you can detect it outside the plant. But as far as being a health, great health concern, as long as the people follow the instructions and stay out of the evacuated area, I think they should be fine from a health point of view.
Lake, we're beginning to hear more about plutonium. What's the significance of plutonium in this situation?
Well, plutonium is something that is more emotional than it is technical in this situation. I think the biggest concern people have is the cesium and the strontium and the iodine in the short haul. Yes, there is some plutonium in there. There's always plutonium in reactor fuel. So it makes more emotional news to talk about plutonium.
All right.
Emotional news. The reactors run on plutonium, uranium. Plutonium was named after the devil. Lake Barrett, a.k.a. mass murderer. There's one particularly telling example of the media shielding him. We covered that one, Dana. Go marking all these bags how Dana is wrong. Radiation good, Dana bad. We do not measure the levels of plutonium. Do not even have a detector to scale it. Chief Cabinet Secretary Dono announced that plutonium. Now, Dono, what a degenerate. That person, right, is guilty of crimes against humanity. One of the worst examples we got of that, too. It's easy to convict them of it. TEPCO finally released data on the radioactive plutonium on March the 28th. It stated 239, 238, 239, 240 were found in the ground, but insisted posed no human risk. The 239 plutonium was the biggest emissions, I think, and 239 is the worst of the plutonium daughters. A single atom of plutonium will eventually cause a tumor. It could take a decade or two. But in this environment, you're getting, that's the gallows laugh, in this environment, you can't escape consuming isotopes every second. And we're talking absurd numbers, by the way. Japan has moved to crack down on independent reportage and criticism of the scumbag government policies in the wake of multiple nuclear reactors and fuel pools melting down by deciding what citizens may or may not talk about in public. What a strange statement that one is. I have no issues believing that, by the way. A new project team was created by the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, the National Police Agency for Intimidation, and Degenerate METI to combat rumors deemed harmful to Japanese security in the wake of the Fukushima disaster. So the truth was banned, basically, right? Which is how are we supposed to have a future when the nuclear industry is doing stuff like that? The government charges that the damage caused by the earthquake and the nuclear accident are being magnified by irresponsible rumors, and that the government must take action for the sake of the public good. The project team has begun to send letters of request to such organizations as telephone companies, internet providers, cable television stations, and others, demanding that they take adequate measures based on guidelines in response to illegal information. The measures include removing any information from internet sites that the Japanese authorities deemed harmful to public order and morality. If that's not Orwellian, what specifically is, folks? West Coast was hit with 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129 in the rain after Fukushima, with a 15 million year half-life was detected in that. This was a study out of Ottawa, Canada. Elevated levels continued for many months, 15 million years. So think about this statement here. Deteriorating plant threatens mass extinction around the world. It does that by radioactive fallout. It's such an incredible statement, because you won't hear that from coal plants, oil plants, and gas plants, which only emit carbon, which you can't have any species on the planet without carbon. So this is NOAA's model of the radioactive fallout. It doesn't include the actual emissions that you're supposed to include and their daughters. And this is just a fraction. It's just a fraction of the isotopes that we're talking about, folks. January 16, 2012, Fukushima owner adds insult to injuries, claims radioactive fallout isn't TEPCO's. Wait till you get a load of this story. This is a great story. If you really want to get a handle on evil, get a load of this. When TEPCO, the company, was hauled in Tokyo District Court October the 31st by the Sunfield Golf Club, which was demanding decontamination of the golf course, TEPCO's lawyers tried something novel. They claimed the company isn't liable because it no longer owns the radioactive fallout poisons that were spewed from its destroyed reactors. You gotta love crazy, eh? Would you eat food from there? Would you eat radioactive farm food grown around a nuclear power plant or a nuclear waste site? 93% of the people are very, very clever. 7% is stupid. AKA the industry, right? Radioactive material that's scattered. It's like a continuous snowstorm of radioactive fallout. Still going on today. An invisible snowstorm. You can't see it or smell it. Scattered and fell from the Fukushima #1 nuclear plant belongs to the individual landowners, not TEPCO. I remember this story. This stunned the court, the plaintiffs, and the press. An attorney for the golf course said, "We are flabbergasted." I'm not surprised. Is anybody really surprised? Does that really shock anybody anymore? The court, though, rejected TEPCO's notion that it's cancer-causing pollution, which is also 1,800 diseases and illnesses, is owned by the area contaminated. You gotta hand it to the crazies. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Not finders keepers. Meanwhile, so if they got no incentive to take responsibility for it, they got no incentive to look for it either, do they? Meanwhile, babies in Japan may be in for a life of debilitation and disease because of... now, when they only acknowledge cesium, which is typical to people that, start believing in the media, you'll start regurgitating that over and over. That's what they want you to do, right? For every cesium-137, there's 100 times more strontium-90 produced. And so I'd rather have cesium contamination than strontium-90. Well, you don't want any of it, right? It's a death sentence. It's a disease factories. Cesium-134, with a 2-year half-life, there's 10 to 20 half-lives, was recently found in infant powder milk. A December the 6th announcement by Meiji Holding Company said it was recalling 400,000 cans of its powder milk for babies older than 9 months. The powder was packaged in April at the height of the Fukushima's largest radiation releases and distributed mostly in May and has in October 2012. So, babies just don't go through one can of powder milk, right? The parents usually buy the case at a time. No one knows how much formula individual babies have consumed. It's well known that fetuses, infants, children, and women are harmed by doses of radiation below the officially allowed exposures. Most exposure standards have been established and viewed. Well, they're based on natural, not man-made stuff. Most exposure standards have been established and view radiation projected effects on reference man, a hypothetical 20 to 30-year-old white male, rather than women and children, the most vulnerable. the International Atomic Energy Agency standards are based on potato chips. It's based on natural, harmless, stupid, everyday elements that were already acclimated to through genetic superior selection. The IAEA standards are not based on man-made anthropogenic radiation, folks. We should all hang our head in shame on that statement. Even tiny amounts of internal radioactive contamination damage the DNA, cause cancers, and weaken the immune system, and there's 1,800 illnesses too. Fukushima meltdown dispersed radioactive contaminations found in vegetables, milk, seafood, water, grain, animal feed, beef. Green tea is a really bad one to be drinking. It's like mushrooms. They aggregated radiation heavily. Green tea grown 250 miles from Fukushima was found contaminated. Rice harvested this fall from 154 farms in Fukushima Prefecture and were found in November to be poisoned with cesium, 25% above the allowable limits. They're not checking for gammas, alphas, betas, and of course, if you can't check that, but they're checking for X-rays too. So not checking for uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, strontium, or anything else. Shipments of rice from the farms were banned, but not before tons had been sold. Presumably the radiation is now the property of consumers under the inventive assertions of TEPCO's corporate attorneys. They rolled back my video, last video. It's not unusual, but I happened to catch it. So at 5 minutes after the video was posted last Thursday, my last video, was 152 views. 186 views at 2 hours. 186 after 2 hours. At 12 hours, I only had 223 because my videos usually stop going up. At 13 hours, I had 179. So again, I had, at 12 hours, I had 223. They rolled it back an hour later to 179 views. And I had 58 thumbs up. And I think it went back to 52. And right now I have 59 3 days later. Which is an extraordinary small number. I'm censored. I'm heavily censored, right? They took down my last site with 24,200 subscribers. I had 24,200 subscribers exactly for 5 years. I never lost one. I never gained one for 5 years. And then last year they just took the site down. And they used to call me and torment me about it. New Fukushima report, devil chain reaction could wipe out Tokyo. Now, Tokyo was incredibly radioactive. All of Tokyo. They couldn't get rid of the water sediment from the reclamation, water filtration systems. One little city had over 55,000 tons of it gathered up. Tokyo couldn't get rid of its garbage. It was so radioactive. They couldn't get rid of the ashes because they were so radioactive from the incinerators, which meant you liberated an absurd amount into the environment because incinerating at a 3,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures doesn't destroy it. The sewage is so radioactive, and they got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of tons every year. They can't get rid of that because it's so radioactive. When your water reclamation, your sewage, your ashes from your incinerators is so radioactive you can't get rid of it, you're living in hell, and you live in a fantasy if you think you're not going to be affected. And I'm heartbroken. I'm absolutely heartbroken by these revelations. It's gut-wrenching, the implications. A new independent report on the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster revealed that Japan's Prime Minister Kan feared events following the March. Well, they were looking at setting up a government office 300 kilometers away for 200,000 government employees. They were going to move the government out of Tokyo. They feared that they would evacuate Tokyo. It was much deeper than that. They were supposed to evacuate Tokyo. Even today, it would make sense to evacuate Tokyo. They decided to cover it up because they felt they would lose their jobs. The government did. So they decided to cover it up. And if you don't believe me, go there to Japan and write on all of these bags I'm showing you. Dana is wrong. Evacuation of Tokyo. I'll give you all the pens, the markers you need to go do it. Japan weighed evacuating Tokyo, the New York Times. And they should have, obviously. Look at it. That's one of the worst jobs you can ever have right there on top of that. That's the nuclear wasteland, folks. So nuclear industry go there and write on all the bags. Dana is wrong. Nuclear good. Dana wrong. Interestingly, too, the objections of TEPCO's president to the plan to pour seawater on the melted Fukushima reactors and boiling spent fuel pool storage pools. Boiling. Because they're still hammering, they're still splitting the atom on top of that, right? That's what, like fuel pools worldwide, there's over 1,000, are splitting the atoms. Invisible snowstorms all day. And if you go back to the beginning of the video, you see all the farms. And this is why you have that question tonight. Would you eat radioactive farm food grown around a nuclear power plant or nuclear waste site? And of course, the majority of people understands that this last gap measure, apparently the idea of Yoshida, the Daiichi manager, is believed to have somewhat cooled the reactors and at least kept the fuel pools from completely emptying. Keep the fuel... They claim the fuel pools didn't go empty, which would have resulted in a much more serious outcome. Hard to believe, but true. Okay. Hard to believe, but actually false. There's reactor 4. There is no fuel pools left. The people to the right are going to try to convince you they're in the fuel pools.
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
So they're pretending they're in a building that don't exist on mainstream TV. That's just a fraction of the people that done that, by the way. Which meant that the entire media organizations had to participate in that deception. That's reassuring. So there is no media, obviously, worldwide. There was no dissent on that, by the way. The assertions that Fukushima isn't a massive disaster, just as it stands today, is ridiculous. It now appears that it was only a combination of occasionally assertive Prime Minister, the heroism of about 50 Daiichi workers. This is a ludicrous assertion. And maybe some dumb luck that gave the world a relative luxury of calling Fukushima an ever metastasizing disaster rather than an almost instant hell on earth. It is an instant hell on earth, my goodness. The radioactive plumes have covered the planet. Go tell these people it's not a disaster. They used to own that. It now appears that it was only a combination of occasionally assertive Prime Minister, heroism of about 50 Diachi workers. Again, the building doesn't even exist. It's a lethal doses everywhere. Crippled Fukushima nuclear plant at 1 year. This is February 29, 2012. It's not even a whole year. So, well, almost. Back in the disaster zone. Where me and my babies go. Growing food right alongside of 1-ton bags of radioactive fallout in a nuclear wasteland to sell it. That's apparently normal. That's legal. Complaining about it is illegal, by the way. Even birds have deserted this area if the latest research is to be believed. That's quite the statement, really, to suggest that, right? Why would people lie about that? Well, that person, if the latest research is who wrote that, was part of the Good Old Boys Club, a party of about 40 journalists, including 5 foreigners, have been granted a restricted tour. As we drive through a police checkpoint, you can see his incentive to downplay things. And into the town of Tomoka, about 15 kilometers away, the radioactivity climbs steadily, hitting 15 microsieverts per hour at the main gate to the nuclear complex. This is a 1-year anniversary. They're going to tour multiple nuclear meltdowns. This is absurdness, folks. On the other end of the plant where the gaping buildings of its 3 most damaged reactors face the Pacific Ocean, the radiation level is 100 times this high, making it still too dangerous to work there. A main challenge now is to remove nuclear fuel from the reactors, explained TEPCO's #1 apologist in his first interview since he took over as plant manager of multiple nuclear meltdowns. It's a technically difficult problem. We cannot hurry, and we want to take it step by step. His predecessor was forced to quit in December because of cancer. Of course, that was unrelated to being at a nuclear meltdown all the time, insists TEPCO. Each of these pictures is absurd. These are 1-ton bags of radiation that the homeless and destitute, there's tens and tens of millions of them, folks. 150,000 different sites. They moved a lot of it now into several main sites, but you got to realize that 150,000 sites they actually the number was actually 640,000 sites, right, where they picked up 1-ton bags of radiation. They moved it to a central locations of 150,000 sites. And several years back, they went in done numbers on radiation, and I can't remember an exact number. 60-something% of the sites were just as contaminated. The worst of 600,000 sites. One town, they put 3,000 Geiger counters in it that don't work, obviously, which only looked for gamma, allegedly. The worst time was when the radiation was 250 millisieverts per year. Again, this is madness to suggest that was the worst. The stacks, the tall, skinny stacks at that site, are 25 sieverts. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. If the stacks are 25 sieverts, how many sieverts are close to the reactors? It's frightening. Greenhouses with 1-ton bags of radiation right alongside of it, and thousands of them. But as the most badly damaged reactor 3 looms into sight, It was 1,500 microsieverts. Again, this is absurdness to suggest that it's 15 microsieverts or 15 millisieverts, 1,500 microsieverts. It really, like, this is what I mean, right? The word journalist is translated into evil demon. Its cargo lethal fuel includes plutonium, which was around 18 pounds per fuel pool, and the roof of the building housing the reactor was blown off the second explosion. They're talking about reactor 3, folks, claiming the roof was blown off. How do you respond to that without calling them, a whole bunch of names, right? Well, here's reactor 3. Looks like the roof's blown off to me, Dana. Yeah. I still get shocked by this, right? This still shocks me. And I'm the last person this stuff should really shock, because I wallow in this excrement all the time, right? I'm the very last person that should be shocked. But this actually still shocks me that they say that kind of stuff. That's the same one they're talking about, reactor 3 with the roof blown off. Look at it. So that's what a roof blown off looks like to a nuclear industry. The building doesn't exist anymore. This was a 190-foot building. Claiming the roof was blown off is crazy. It's still too dangerous for workers to enter reactor number 3. Nobody is going inside a Medusa. Just suggesting it is madness, right? So, like, he knows, the engineer, if the engineer doesn't know nobody's ever going to go into reactor 3 again, we don't have any hope of a future, period. Go marking all those bags how wrong Dana is to my detractors. The state of reactor 2, and you can see up in the top corner the heat signature. That's 100% meltdown. That burned constantly for days. We identified the problem as a broken thermometer, said the plant manager. I'm terribly sorry for everyone for causing so much concern. The industry's so evil. It's really, it's fascinating how they all play their little parts to be super extra evil. Radiation from the Diachi plant has blanketed 8% of the entire country. 8% of the country. And 99% of the rest of the planet. Look at these monsters burying 1-ton bags of radiation in the ground. Well, because it's pulsing gamma shines, X-rays, and neutrons. But still, rain's going to wash through it into the water tables forever. Much of the worst radiation damage was inflicted on the 14th and the 15th, when a plume from the plant was carried by winds northwest over pristine farmland in Fukushima, one of Japan's key food baskets. Well, Fukushima was the food basket for the Asian countries. Now it's the poison factory for the entire planet. It rained on those nights, and the rain brought the radiation down on top of us and everybody else worldwide. For reasons that remain murky, the government delayed releasing data would have shown the radiation's path. The government had put out memos saying you can't release the plumes under any circumstances. The slaves have guns. The radiation path and saved many from heavy exposure. Again, this is they had this computer system called Speedy set up, where they would punch in the prevailing winds, and they would put in poundages of fuel rods, right? And it was said this was atomized and aerosol into the environment, and it would make a plume model out of it. They actually made over 5,500 of these radioactive fallout models, but they wouldn't release it to the public. They did, however, release it to the U.S. government, military that is in their area. They didn't release it to the population that paid for it. Fukushima newspaper editor, we don't report on health risks from radiation. People might worry. Here's among a tiny number of farmers ignored a government directive to evacuate that area. That's probably him right there, huh? Harvesting food by 1 ton bags of radiation. Across the region, workers in boiler suits en masse have descended on towns with power hoses to scour the Diachi plant's toxic payloads from playgrounds. My God, right? Going into playgrounds with pressure washers to decontaminate them. It just like boggles the mind that anybody would even write that, let alone suggest it. Parks and other public areas, even though that's exactly what they've done, by the way. The homeless have removed most of the most dangerous contaminants, cesium. Again, cesium was weaponized against the population about 70 years ago. From the grounds of the Minnesota High School, says his principal. That's a scary sentence right there. EU to lift import curbs on rice from Fukushima, which simply wasn't true at the time of this. That was like 2016 or something. Like other public buildings, the school has planted a large dosimeter. There's 3,000 in this one community alone. Front gates, dosimeter at the front gates was the actual Geiger counter, not a dosimeter. Showing the current radiation, large digital letters. And it was in microsieverts, right? Again, it was always 0 point something, right? It was always, it obviously didn't work. We know this from the numbers for sure. And, you know, when you see all these 1 ton bags of radiation, but the schools were no radiation at all. 1 ton, they'd walk past millions of 1 ton bags to get to school, and at the school there's no radiation. I mean, the students were only allowed outside for an hour a day or something like that for the first couple of years. Only half of his 360 students have returned since last year because they were stupid enough to get sucked into it. These fake Geiger counters and microsieverts. 0.2. Like, people should just pour gas on them and set them on fire. Send a message to Scumbag TEPCO. The radiation readout outside of Minnesota, which was 20 million becquerels a kilogram throughout that whole community, and you got to multiply that around 68 to get a square meter. It's just terrifying. I don't know if we'll ever recover to what we were before March 11, but we are certainly improving. He says, pointing to the flashing red dosimeter outside, which reads 0.2 microsieverts. So whoever made that statement should have been arrested and taken to a psychiatric facility. In response, the government controversially hiked the limit to 20 millisieverts, 20,000 microsieverts, sparking bitter protests for placing children at risk. But they just went ahead and done it because that's what evil does. Evil doesn't listen to reality. Many children since reported low immunity and other health problems, nosebleeds, nosebleeds that don't stop, diarrhea each day, dysentery. though nobody has proved a link to the nuclear plant. Top cancer doctor, nuclear radiation is the most carcinogenic thing that exists. Like, what a cruel thing to say, right? Nobody has proven a link to the nuclear plant, despite the fact they picked up 30 to 60 million one-ton bags in those same areas. There was no harm to the victims, particularly the children, Dana. Top cancer doctor disagrees. Radiation health specialist disagrees. Children with 11 becquerels of cesium start to see heart problems. Irreversible heart damage for children with 50 becquerels a kilogram of gamma. Child's risk of cancer, by the way, from radiation is up to 100 times higher than an adult with the same exposure. And at 50 becquerels a kilogram in humans lead to irreversible lesions in the vital organs. Hamano has said his students are limited to 2 hours of play outside a day. And they didn't evacuate them. And are told to stay on the main road when walking home and avoid hot spots around the city. So anybody thinks people in the nuclear industry are any attributes of a human, you're wrong. Humans don't do stuff like this, okay? Monsters do stuff like this. Sadistic demons do stuff like this. But humans don't allow children to live in this environment. They don't know any better. By April, he expects the radiation have fallen enough to allow unlimited outdoor play. We will survive this horrible event, I believe, said the principal. By April, he expects the radiation to fall enough of 2012 to fall enough to allow children to play outside with unlimited time. We should all hang our head in humiliation, folks, at that. Outside the zone, the government is decontaminating hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland. There's actually 600 plus thousand places. 600,000. By scraping off 5 centimeters, 2.5 inches of topsoil. An operation estimates will leave a pile of nuclear waste about 29 million cubic meters. 29 million one-ton bags. 30 million one-ton bags. New evidence suggests 60 million. Work here is hard, unrelenting, and in the long term possibly fatal. Tahashaki said he is motivated by, above all, by one thing. We will try to allow people to return to the nuclear wasteland as early as possible. It's a mammoth task. Japan's government has admitted that dismantling the reactors is 260 tons. Reactors with an S, claiming there's 260 tons of nuclear fuel. Will take up to 40 years. So it's going to take them 315 years to decommission Donneray, for God's sakes. A normal nuclear plant takes 60 years to decommission without a meltdown. They're going to decommission a meltdown in 40 years. And then they're going to claim there's only 260 tons. Each reactor was 720 tons. There's 4 that we know melted down. They were changing the fuel in 1, which meant it was 3/4 full of reactor core. And that there was 2 fuel pools at the top of each of the buildings with up to 10 times as much in each pool as a reactor can hold, which is 720 tons, which is 800 assemblies at 1,800 pounds assembly. I'm just saying. To suggest that it's a 260-ton payload, I've never actually seen them that low of a number. That's the lowest number I think I've ever seen him claim. I've seen some doozies, but that's like wild, man. In the meantime, the work at Fukushima Daiichi goes on and on and on and on. Bird numbers plummet around the stricken Fukushima plant. Experts' response: is Fukushima more serious than we thought? April 13th, 2011. So that's 32 days later. And so they got a senior lecturer in medical science, Dr. Pradip is a senior lecturer in medical radiation at the School of Medical Science, RMIT University. So, Dana, there's no way he's going to lie. No, of course not. The increase of levels of Fukushima incident to a level 7, which is the scale of 1 to 7, is combined reclassified of the earlier, because they raised it at this point to a level 7, of the earlier individual assessments of the different levels of incidences of different reactors. It does not mean it will do any extra harm to the public, although level 7 is the same level as Chernobyl. Well, no, level 7 is the highest level you can go. Chernobyl was a 200-ton reactor. Each of Fukushima's are 720 tons, with 4 decades of those reactor cores stored at the top of the building. Each building. The difference is completely different. It was pure uranium versus Chernobyl was mostly graphite moderator. The Japanese Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency estimates, the Japanese Nuclear Safety Agency said, estimates that the amount of radioactive materials released in Fukushima is 90% less than Chernobyl. These people go to universities to get an education, to get the job to tell you lies. That's how it actually works, right? Their parents knew about this and put them in school to get the job, see? Paid for it through bursaries from the same organizations, so their children carry on the lies. You got generations of this inbreeding happening. So the fuel pools were at the very top of the building, same with the reactor core. That's reactor 3, for instance, over there. It's completely gone, completely destroyed. So the different levels, each level, so from level 1 to level 2 is 10 times higher. So level 3 is 10 times higher than level 2. Level 4 is 10 times higher than a level 3. A level 5 is 10 times higher than a level 4. Level 6 is 10 times higher than a level 5. Level 7 is 10 times. But level 7 is the highest it goes. So if it gets 1,000 times worse, it still stays at a level 7. The idea is to make you complacent. So you eat the radioactive food, drink the radioactive drinks that they send to you, and get sick and die. And the nuclear industry claims nobody has ever gotten sick a single time anywhere on the planet from nuclear power. Dr. Don Higsons is a retired nuclear safety specialist. Remember, these people are experts and cut your throat on a drop of a hat, ready to rock and roll, destroy you, your friends, your families, your loved ones, your communities, so they can get a paycheck every Friday. Dr. Don Higgins is a retired nuclear safety specialist and fellow of the Institution of Engineers Australia, fellow of the Australian Radiation Protection Society. So surely we can trust him, Dana, in your dreams. The reference to the United Nations event scale, IAEA event scale, which is United Nations. I do not have it in front of me, but as I recall, it relates to the nuclear incidents, accidents on a scale of 1 to 7, with 7 being the worst. This would imply that someone is rating the Fukushima incident as being as bad as Chernobyl. To my mind, this would be nonsense. Now, this is a 100% expert. He sets the radiation protection for Australia. That's what all of these people do, right? They're the experts the government turns to set radiation protection levels, and they got the job so they can cut your throat, so they can destroy you with the stroke of a pen. The whole industry worldwide is exactly like that. The experts worldwide are all exactly like this. Their job is to cut your throat and leave you to bleed out on the side of the road.
The division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima.
Ernie Gunnison says it doesn't look like that. It looks perfect. I put him up there with a fuel pulser too. He made the racks for the assemblies, which holds the fuel rods, right? So if he doesn't know that it's gone, and he was pumped out to everybody constantly. I actually got a folder I'm doing on him. He refuses to acknowledge the fuel pools had melted down. Some of his clips I play, you remember, where TEPCO went in and put supports on a reactor 4 fuel pool. Remember those videos? And his wife was a public a spokesperson for the nuclear industry for 2 decades. The top of the game. Rating the Fukushima accidents being as bad as the Chernobyl reactor accident, to my mind, this would be nonsense, says the Australian nuclear expert. He says the number of workers hospitalized with acute radiation sickness, Chernobyl, 134. It's an absurd small number. 600 helicopter pilots died, for God's sakes. They were all admitted to the hospitals. Fukushima, none. Number of deaths of workers within a month, Chernobyl, 31. Fukushima, none. Of course, Chernobyl was brutal die-offs. He said, I could go on. Again, the word radiation experts is somebody who will run over your child, get out, run back, go through your child's pocket looking for lunch money, and as your child begs for help, they back up over and make sure they're dead. Dead child tells no stories. That's the nuclear industry's motto. Dr. John Price is a former member of the Safety Policy Unit of the National Nuclear Corporation in UK, an adjunct associate professor at Monash University, Australia, and a private consultant. The 10,000 terabytes is now reduced to 1,000 terabytes, presumably through decay. Again, this is a ludicrous assertion, folks. One problem is that the radioactive material is able to be spread by the wind. It appears they are now scattering an anti-scattering agent, which is presumably to stop the particles from leaving the plant site. So claiming it never left the site, that's what he's up to. Radioactive material threatens farms in Japan. Soil from eastern Fukushima, some neighboring areas of levels of radioactive cesium. Again, every time I hear the word cesium, it actually upsets me, right? Because it's the deception. Above safe levels for human consumption, and poses a threat to the agricultural in the area, with the millions and millions and millions of one-ton bags, that area. Threatening agricultural. Researchers took soil samples from 46 of Japan's 47 regions and didn't find any danger, Dana. And then they psyched you over to the paper that backed it up. A challenge lies in the fact that estimates of the 137 cesium emissions from the Fukushima are extremely uncertain, when they're obviously not. Not only is the total release from the damaged nuclear power plant poorly known, and cesium again, the discussion on the disposition over all of Japan has not been made. That was November the 14th, 2011, that paper came out. Our estimates of the disposition made for the period between March the 20th and April the 19th, because no observations of cesium, again the word cesium is weaponized as a deception, disposition which is followed, were made between March the 12th and March the 17th. March the 12th was reactor 1 blew up, and March the 17th was after reactor 3 had blown up the second time. The dispersion model did not stimulate any disposition at the observation locations on March the 18th and March the 19th. Thus, our quantitative estimates do not include the first 8 days. So the radioactive fallout wasn't calculated until after the 20th. So they're not using the inventory, right? And so when the reactors melt down, they're consuming steel at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. They're consuming everything, rocks and whatever. And water, it's ionizing and radiating, atomizing and aerosoling it and releasing it constantly, continuously, could be for thousands of years. See? So like a nuclear weapon goes off, it's a millionth of a second. And it picks up 1 million tons and ionizes and radiates, atomizes and aerosols it and distributes it around the globe, right? So imagine something that's doing it not just for 1 billionth of a second, but every second, all day, every day, year after year, forever and ever and ever. That's what a nuclear meltdown actually is. Oh, well, we made it. So the universal joint, I don't know why I never thought about it. I always think the worst, I suppose, right? It's been a tough summer for me. Kidney stones, and cancer, and everything else, right? We can't do expeditions with a kidney stone. And we got mass bird die-offs happening. It's hard to appreciate how stressed out I actually am over this, because the insects have disappeared. You know, my neighbor said to me yesterday that, well, they've been here their whole life, right? And frogs are cutting through the garden because there's a pond just right here. All summer long, frogs have been just everywhere in the grass. They've never seen that before. And I said, well, where's the predators that eats the frogs? And it was him and his wife, and he said, my God, I never thought about that. And they were thinking, I said, remember when the crows would land on your roof and you would get upset because, like, come on, crows, go somebody else's roof and dance around. You're driving me crazy. And they said, yeah, 100%. And he said, you know, I can't remember the last time I heard crows on my roof around here. Because it happens in increment over a decade. It's just like they didn't exist, right? So, like, the big problem with me is we're getting at the end of the summer. I'm out in the Atlantic, the North Atlantic Ocean, on an island, where it's the biggest migratory venue on the entire planet for seabirds. 45 million seabirds a year are supposed to come through here. And I desperately want to get some research punched in before the weather gets so scary I can't go out there, right? And, you know, like I say, if they didn't take down my site with 24,000 subscribers, I would have had no problem raising the money to cover the expenses, right? And I'm just doing the best I can. Unfortunately, it's not enough. And it haunts me every friggin' night and every morning when I wake up. It actually haunts me, eh? All summer long, it's been just a living nightmare for me. I can't get any research in. So it looks like now we're going to be able to get some research in. I still like to run across the province on the trails and count birds in all the ponds. We still got to get it on the ocean. We still got to head over to the Burin Peninsula and places like that where we got mass die-offs happening. And remember, the last couple of presentations on die-off, right in the middle of where they claimed all the bird flu was killing all these birds, which was unprecedented, a leap from to the wild population. We've never seen that in history before. That's the cover story, obviously. But right in the middle of this mass die-off, there was an area where they claimed thousands and thousands of birds had died of the bird flu, but they done the test, and we showed those headlines where they said the birds didn't die, and there was many different species, shearwaters and gulls and mallards and all kinds of species. They were all emaciated, but on both sides in different counties, they claimed it was the bird flu. But in the center of it, the research came out and it came out and said, well, the birds were all emaciated. Everything that we collected was emaciated. It wasn't the bird flu. We got to get out and prove it down here, what's really happening. And it's important, right? And we're going to be able to soon. And I'm just stressed out because it's been going on all summer. And obviously the kidney stone, I can't go on and research expeditions with a kidney stone. But now we know that's gone. There's still hope to salvage, because it's a late summer here, right? So it looks like we got a little bit of a window left to do some research, which means we're going to stop doing these shows soon. We're going to get out. And now we live in a different time, right? Like my phone has high-speed internet, and I mean high speed, right? So I'll be able to upload high-quality footage on a regular basis from this expedition, which is something we haven't been able to do per se, right? Now where technology is finally advanced to the point. So let's close it down, and we got 55 votes. I'm just apologizing that I didn't do the things that were supposed to be done this year. It's nobody's fault. That's the industry has sucker punched us, right? Would you eat highly deadly radioactive farm food grown around disease factories known as nuclear power plants or nuclear waste sites? And a couple of trolls, there's sort of a couple of trolls, but majority of the people said, no, oh no, you don't. I'm not eating that. Unfortunately, your graveyards are full of those people because you're being poisoned in your supermarkets. So we're going to end the poll. Hi, everybody. I'll read the comments after. We're just going to end the video. That was all new material. I had to add some stuff in to help articulate it, right? But that was a whole bunch of stories we've never covered before, so that's always, I shouldn't say the word fun, but in my world it is, right? Because we cover a lot of the daily news cycle. Now I have 2 shows ready to go already. So tomorrow night's show is ready to go and Tuesday night's show is ready to go. How pathetic is that? Tells you what I've done all weekend. I know, I'm pathetic. Good night, everybody. Hope everybody has a great night. And a great day tomorrow. They say the idler control valve is not going to show up until Friday by the looks of it. And bastards are supposed to show up tomorrow. I was excited about it showing up tomorrow. That would be a major breakthrough. tomorrow I got to go pick up 2 U-joints and find someone to install it. I got a guy who probably install it. I watched the videos on it today, and thanks again to Ed for diagnosing it correctly. And he was 100% sure of it. And sure enough, I went out and sprayed grease on just one of the knuckles to see if I can isolate which one it was. I'm going to change both of them anyway, but tomorrow. And so that's a huge deal. I'm stressed about it. And so if that works tomorrow, that's a huge deal. And that's 100% what it should be too, right? Because I didn't grease them because I'm a knucklehead myself, right? I'm caught up. I got no excuses for not greasing them, by the way. That's the sad part. In reality, I should be putting a new shaft in there. I will later on probably, but we're going to change it out, get it mobile, get the boat in the water, get ready for some expeditions across the province. Too bad Dana couldn't make it down. With his great big motor home, make my fucking life a bit less miserable. That'll be okay. Oh well, can't win them all. Maybe next year, right? Aye. Well, we'll see everybody tomorrow night. I got a great show. I got a massive show ready for tomorrow night. That's so sad, isn't it? Scumbag nuclear industry. Yeah, I should have greased them obsolete. I didn't. I got no excuse either. Just I'm overwhelmed, right? I got so much on my plate and I can't get it done. You got to realize what that does to somebody like me. I'm a doer, right? I'm a go-getter, and when I can't do it, it's bad, man. I'm a truth junkie. I'm a fact junkie. I'm a fact finder. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. We see everybody tomorrow night in just 20 odd hours. We'll be back grinding the scumbag industry into the ground. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you made it this far. Hugs for you and your friends, your families, your loved ones, your pets, your insects. We'll see all of you tomorrow night. Same place, at the same time. Have a great night, everybody. Yeah, I know, Dana. It's too bad. Have a great night, my friend. Good night, everyone. Take care.
Wir betreten Feuer.